How do you live well in a world you cannot control? Not survive, not cope, not endure. Live well. With clarity, with purpose, with something that actually resembles peace. In a world where people you love die without warning, where careers collapse, where everything you build can be taken from you on a Tuesday afternoon with no explanation. Most philosophies dodge this question. They promise that if you do the right things, pray correctly, think positively, achieve enough, the world will eventually cooperate. Stoicism does not promise this. Stoicism looks directly at the worst that can happen and says, yes, that can happen. It probably will. Now what? That unflinching honesty is why Stoicism is the only ancient philosophy still being actively practiced by millions of people today. Not studied, practiced, used as a daily operating system by people under genuine pressure, surgeons, soldiers, athletes, people going through things that would break most of us. This is the entire philosophy of Stoicism, where it came from, what it actually says, how it works, and why it still cuts through when almost nothing else does. Stoicism was born from a shipwreck. Around 301 BC, a Phoenician merchant named Zeno of Citium was sailing from his home to Athens when his ship went down and he lost everything. He made it to Athens with nothing and wandered into a bookshop. He picked up a record of the life of Socrates and read it standing in the aisle. He turned to the bookseller and asked, "Where can I find men like this?" The bookseller pointed at a passing philosopher named Crates of Thebes. Zeno followed him out the door and studied under him for years. He eventually developed his own philosophy, more nuanced than the radical cynics, more applicable to ordinary human life, and began teaching in a public colonnade in Athens called the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch. His followers became the people of the Stoa, Stoics. The origin matters. Stoicism was not invented in a library by a comfortable man. It was invented by a man who had just lost everything and was trying to figure out how to keep going. That is what the philosophy is for. That is why it works. Everything in Stoicism builds from three ideas. Understand these three, and you have the entire architecture. Foundation 1, the dichotomy of control. This is the bedrock, the single idea that, if genuinely absorbed, changes the entire texture of your experience. There are things within your control, and there are things outside your control. Within your control, your judgments, your intentions, your desires, your efforts, the way you respond to what happens to you. These belong entirely to you. No external force can take them without your permission. Outside your control, everything else, your body, your reputation, your wealth, other people's opinions, other people's actions, outcomes, weather, markets, whether the people you love stay healthy. None of this is yours in any final sense. Epictetus, born a slave, had his leg broken by his master as a demonstration of power, became one of the greatest philosophers of the ancient world. Stated this at the very opening of his handbook for living. Some things are in our control and others are not. Only when you know which is which do you begin to live freely. The practical consequence is enormous. Every anxiety, every frustration, every crushing sense of helplessness comes from applying desire or fear to things outside your control. Wanting outcomes you cannot guarantee. Dreading losses you cannot prevent. The moment you relocate your desire entirely to what is within your control, your own effort, your own character, your own response, you become, in a precise and specific sense, invulnerable. There is nothing left to take. This does not mean you stop caring about outcomes. It means you stop being enslaved by them. Foundation 2. Virtue is the only true good. The Stoics made a claim that sounds extreme until you think it through carefully. They said the only thing that is unconditionally good for all people in all circumstances is virtue, and the only thing unconditionally bad is vice. Everything else, wealth, health, fame, pleasure, long life, they called preferred indifference, worth pursuing in ordinary circumstances, making life easier, but not good in the deepest sense because they can all be used badly. Wealth can make a person cruel. Health can make a person arrogant. Fame destroys character more often than it reveals it. Only virtue is always good. The Stoics identified 4 forms: wisdom, knowing what is true and what matters; justice, treating others as they deserve; courage, acting rightly even when it is frightening; temperance, wanting the right things in the right measure. These 4 cannot be turned against you. They constitute a good human life regardless of what happens externally. The practical consequence is again radical. A Stoic slave living with wisdom and justice is living better, in the only sense that finally matters, than a wealthy tyrant who acts with cruelty. The quality of your life is determined entirely by the quality of your character, not by what you have, by who you are. This was scandalous in the ancient world. It remains uncomfortable today because it removes every excuse. Foundation 3. We are part of something larger. The Stoics believed in a rational order underlying reality, what they called the logos, not a personal god in the conventional sense. More like a pervasive rationality that structures the universe and connects every living being to every other. From this they drew a conclusion that was, for their time, genuinely revolutionary. If all human beings participate in the same logos, then all human beings are fundamentally equal in the only way that counts. Equal in their capacity for reason, equal in their membership of what the Stoics called the cosmopolis, the city of the world, the community of all rational beings. This is where Stoic ethics gets its force. Human beings exist for each other. Collaboration is the natural condition of rational beings. When you harm another person, you harm yourself, because you and they are expressions of the same underlying order. The Stoics were among the first thinkers in Western history to argue that the distinction between Greek and barbarian, between citizen and foreigner, between free and enslaved, was philosophically incoherent. Under the Logos, these distinctions mean nothing. This idea did not immediately change Roman law, but it planted something, and what it planted eventually grew into the foundations of the modern world. Stoicism is not only a set of beliefs, it is a set of disciplines, daily practices that train the mind to actually inhabit the philosophy rather than merely understand it intellectually. Negative visualization. Every morning or at any quiet moment, the Stoic deliberately imagines losing the things they value most. The death of someone close, the loss of income, the collapse of health. They hold these images clearly and ask, if this happened, could I still act with virtue? Could I still choose who I am? This is not morbidity, it is inoculation. A person who has genuinely contemplated losing something is grateful for it every single day. The practice dissolves the background anxiety that comes from pretending that loss will never come. It cannot come as a shock if you have already faced it honestly. The view from above. The Stoics practiced imagining themselves lifting out of their immediate situation and seeing it from a vast distance, from orbit, from the edge of everything. From there, the argument that felt crushing this morning shrinks to nothing. The embarrassment that seemed unbearable becomes invisible. Your city is a dot. Your lifespan is a flicker. This is not nihilism. It is proportion. The view from above does not make things meaningless. It shows you which things actually have meaning and which things only felt urgent because you were too close to them. The discipline of assent. Every experience arrives first as an impression. an automatic pre-rational reaction. Something happens and before thought you feel something: fear, anger, desire. The Stoics taught that between the impression and your response there is always a gap, and in that gap is your freedom. You do not have to accept the first impression. You can examine it. You can ask, is this thing I am reacting to actually as bad as it appears? Am I responding to reality or to my interpretation of it? This is what Stoic self-mastery looks like in practice, not the suppression of emotion, not pretending not to feel things, the development of the ability to choose which impressions you act on, rather than being dragged through your own life by every reaction your nervous system produces. Epictetus, 50 to 135 AD, was born a slave. His master broke his leg to demonstrate that Epictetus's philosophical talk about enduring pain was empty. Epictetus reportedly said, "Did I not tell you it would break?" He was eventually freed, started a school, and became one of the most sought-after teachers in the Roman world. What he taught was simple and devastating. The body can be enslaved. The mind, the ruling faculty, cannot be without your cooperation. No one can make you servile or bitter or afraid unless you allow it. The moment you stop allowing it, you are free in the only sense that the Stoics considered real freedom. He wrote nothing himself. Everything we have comes from notes taken by his student Arian. The most articulate philosophy of inner freedom in the ancient world reaches us through a second-hand record of the words of a man who spent years in chains. Seneca, 4 BC to 65 AD, lived in the contradictions of enormous wealth and Stoic principle with complete self-awareness. Roman senator, playwright, tutor to Nero, one of the richest men in the empire. He wrote essays on the value of simplicity from a villa he could barely afford to heat. He did not pretend this was resolved. He said he wrote not as a teacher, but as a fellow patient, someone working through the same problems alongside the reader, making progress, but not claiming a rival. When Nero finally ordered his death, Seneca faced it with the composure decades of practice had built. He told the friends weeping around him that he had spent his life preparing for exactly this moment and could not abandon his philosophy when it was finally actually needed. He died slowly from an insufficient dose of poison. He remained calm throughout. Marcus Aurelius, 121 to 180 AD, was the most powerful man in the world for nearly 20 years. Roman emperor, commander of the largest army in the Western world. He spent almost half his reign on military campaign, watching plague tear through his city and his legions, governing an empire under pressures that would have destroyed most people. Every night he wrote in a private journal, in Greek, the language of philosophy, notes to himself, reminders to be patient, to stop caring what others thought, to remember he would die, to treat the people around him as they deserved, even when they frustrated him. He never intended anyone to read these notes. They were a private discipline. The record of a man holding himself to a standard he found genuinely difficult to meet. The meditations survive. 12 books of private practice. They are not a record of achievement. They are a record of effort. And that honesty, the most powerful man in the world writing reminders to himself because he kept forgetting, is one of the most valuable things the Stoic tradition has left us. Stoicism has outlasted every empire that produced it. Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, the most evidence-based psychotherapy currently in use, is built almost entirely on Stoic principles. The founding idea that it is not events that disturb us but our judgments about events comes directly from Epictetus. Modern psychology rediscovered in the 20th century what the Stoics had systematized in the 3rd century BC. It works because it is built on something true. You cannot control outcomes. You can control effort. You cannot control other people. You can control your response. You cannot control what happens to your body. You can control what you do with your mind. This is not motivational rhetoric. It is an accurate description of the structure of human experience. And once you actually see it, not just understand it, but see it operating in your own reactions, your own anxieties, your own moments of unnecessary suffering, the effect is difficult to reverse. You stop being entirely at the mercy of things outside your control. Not because those things stop mattering, not because loss stops hurting, but because you have located your sense of self in a place those things cannot reach. Epictetus, who had his leg broken and was owned by another person, died free in every sense the Stoics considered real. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the world and watched everything he loved decay around him, found something that the empire could not give him and could not take away. That is the offer Stoicism makes, not happiness in the shallow sense, not the absence of pain, something older and harder and more durable than either of those things. The capacity to face whatever is in front of you, clearly, honestly, without flinching, and still choose who you are going to be. That offer has not expired. It is available right now.